She lied about the inheritance being worth $300, $0, only to secretly sell our family home for $750, $0, and hide the cash. Then used my name to take out a $200, $0 loan. Now she's fighting me in court over the money and property I thought was ours. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, trying to piece together a life that's fallen apart because of a woman who was supposed to be my partner, my confidant. But here I am. And honestly, the whole thing feels like a bad joke, except it's my life and it's not funny. It started a few months ago, small things at first. Sarah, my wife, had always been a bit of a bitch, sharp-tongued, quick to dismiss, always putting on that perfect face in front of her friends. But I noticed she was acting strangely distant. Phone calls late at night, secretive texts. Little things, but enough to make me suspicious. She'd snap at me if I asked about her day, brush off my questions with a laugh or a dismissive shrug. I figured she was just stressed at work. She's a boss at a marketing firm, and she's always been a bit of a control freak. But then I found out she'd been lying to me about something huge, and everything changed. It all blew up when I decided to dig a little. I've been going through some papers in her purse just out of curiosity, and I stumbled on a stack of bank statements I'd never seen before. They were in her name, but I'd never been involved in any of her financial stuff before. What caught my eye was a withdrawal for $750, $0. Yeah, I know, that's a lot. I thought maybe it was a typo or something, so I looked closer. Turns out she'd secretly sold our family home. Our home, the one we'd raised our daughter in, the one I thought was our biggest shared asset, for way more than I expected. She said the inheritance was only worth $300, $0, but that was a lie. She lied about the inheritance from her grandmother, saying it was a modest amount, just enough to keep up appearances. But she'd actually sold the house, and the cash she got from it. She hid it. I found out she'd transferred the money to a secret account she kept under a fake name. I also discovered she'd taken out a $200, $0 loan using my name. I never signed anything, never authorized any of it, but somehow she managed to forge my signature or manipulate the system. I was furious. That kind of betrayal cuts deep. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I'd built this life with her, trusted her, and she'd been lying to me the whole time. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the trust, the foundation of everything I thought we had. I started noticing other things, small clues that pointed to her cheating too. Late nights out, secret meetings, strange hotel receipts. I never caught her red-handed, but the pieces fit together too neatly. When I finally confronted her, she was defensive, bitchy even. Said I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. She threw a fit when I brought up the bank statements, called me crazy for accusing her of anything. She said the money was for a new business idea she had, that I was just jealous and insecure. But I knew better. I knew she was lying. She always lied, spun stories to cover her tracks. And the worst part, she admitted to the affair, but only when cornered. Said she was bored, that I didn't give her enough attention. She had a guy, some younger guy from her office, and she'd been sleeping with him for months. Said she didn't care about the marriage anymore, that she was done pretending. The emotional hit was brutal. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and just numb. All those years I thought we were building something real, and it was all a lie. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in my gut. I kept replaying everything, her sneaking around, the lies, the secret accounts, the stolen money. I felt like a fool. How did I not see it? How did I miss the signs? I was angry, so angry I wanted to scream. And then there was the sadness, thinking about my daughter, about how her mother could do this to her family, to us. I decided I couldn't just let it go. I needed to find out everything, to get to the bottom of it. I started digging into her accounts, her phone, her emails. I hired a private investigator because I was too emotionally involved to trust myself. What I found out was worse than I expected. She'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. The sale of the house, the money she'd hidden, the loan she'd taken out, all of it was part of some bigger scheme to get away, to start fresh with her new guy, leaving me with nothing. I was furious at her for lying, for betraying everything we built. But I was also scared. How do you fight someone who's been manipulating the system, hiding assets and cheating on you? That's when I decided I had to fight back, not just emotionally but legally. I wanted my fair share of what was ours, what she had stolen from me from our daughter. That's how this whole mess started spiraling out of control. I wasn't just going to let her walk away with the money and the house, not without a fight. The betrayal was one thing, but the financial theft, that was a whole other level of betrayal. I still remember sitting in my office that night, staring at the pile of evidence I'd collected. I felt sick but also determined. I wasn't going down without a fight. I had to figure out my next move, how to get my money, my property, and maybe even some kind of justice. I knew it was going to get messy, but I was ready. I just wish I'd seen it coming sooner. After I got over the initial shock of discovering what Sarah had done, I knew I had to act fast. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her lies went. She'd been planning this for a while, and I couldn't just sit around hoping she'd come to her senses or that the truth would somehow reveal itself. I needed a plan, something precise, calculated, and ruthless enough to get back what she'd stolen and make her pay for the betrayal. I started by hearing a private investigator. I didn't trust myself to keep cool, and I needed concrete evidence, proof that she was cheating, that she'd been hiding money, and that she'd been planning all this behind my back. Over the next few weeks, the pie gathered a mountain of information. I watched her come and go from the office, saw her meet with that younger guy in secret, and even caught her entering a hotel late at night. It was disgusting to see her so brazen about it. I felt like my guts were being ripped out, but I also knew I needed this evidence if I was going to fight her legally. Once I had it all, I sat down and mapped out my next move. I knew I couldn't confront her directly just yet. She'd get defensive, deny everything, and probably destroy any chance I had of reclaiming what was ours. So I decided to go to a lawyer, someone who specialized in divorce, asset recovery, and financial fraud. I explained everything: the secret sale of the house, the hidden money, the forged signatures, the loan under my name, the affair. The lawyer listened carefully, took notes, and then laid out my options. One thing was clear: Sarah had committed multiple acts of financial fraud. She lied about the inheritance, sold the house for way more than she claimed, and used my name without my permission. I had a strong case to contest the sale, reclaim the money, and even press charges if it came to that. But I also knew I needed to be strategic. If I went to court too soon, she might destroy or hide even more evidence. I decided to gather everything I could: bank statements, emails, texts, the sale documents, and prepare for a legal battle. I also wanted to see how much she'd actually hidden away, because I suspected there was more. Meanwhile, she kept up the act at home, acting bitchy and dismissive like nothing was wrong. But I saw the cracks: her nervous glances when I mentioned money, her over-the-top defenses when I asked about the sale. She was panicking, and I relished the moment. I knew she was hiding something, and I was determined to expose her. One night I caught her in a lie about where she was going. She said she was working late, but I followed her and found her meeting that guy again at a fancy restaurant downtown. I snapped a few photos on my phone. Seeing her with him, so confident and brazen, made my blood boil. That was the moment I realized she didn't care about our marriage anymore. She was ready to walk away with everything, no matter how much damage she caused. I decided I'd fight fire with fire. I couldn't let her get away with this. I started drafting legal documents, filing a claim to freeze her accounts, demand an accounting of all the hidden funds, and block her from selling or transferring any more assets without my knowledge. I also contacted a forensic accountant, someone who could trace every dollar she'd moved, every account she'd opened under fake names. The goal was to get a full picture of her financial deception. While all this was happening, I couldn't help feeling a mixture of anger, betrayal, and helplessness. I'd always prided myself on being a fair, honest guy. I worked hard, played by the rules, and trusted my wife. Now I was fighting to get back what she'd stolen, and I was worried I might lose everything: my house, my savings, my reputation. The worst part was feeling like I was losing her too. She'd become a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. The woman I married, who used to be kind and caring, had turned into this manipulative, vindictive person who was willing to destroy our life for her own gain. I kept reminding myself that I had to stay focused. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about making her accountable for her lies and her betrayal. I was ready to take her to court to fight her for every penny she'd stolen and to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I knew she'd fight back, call me paranoid, say I was overreacting, but I didn't care. I'd seen enough now to know that she was dangerous, dangerous to my peace, to my financial security, and to our family. And so I waited. I waited for the right moment to file my legal claims, knowing that once the wheels of the law started turning, everything would come crashing down for her. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not without a fight. I had to protect what was mine. I just hoped I was strong enough to see it through. By the time I had all the evidence lined up and the legal strategy in place, I felt like I was in a war I couldn't see the end of. Every day brought new surprises, new lies I uncovered, and more reasons to hate what Sarah had become. I kept asking myself how the woman I married, the woman I thought loved me, could turn into someone so cold, so calculated. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt even more was knowing she'd been lying to me about the inheritance, about the house, about everything. She had spun this web of deception so tightly that I almost didn't recognize her. One of the most shocking revelations came when I finally got access to the bank account she'd hidden. The money from the sale of our house. It wasn't just sitting in some secret account. She'd transferred it into multiple offshore accounts, hidden behind shell companies, all under fake names. I couldn't believe how elaborate her scheme was. She had planned this for months, maybe longer. I also discovered she'd been using some of the money to fund her affair, paying for hotels, dinners, gifts for her lover. All the lies, all the manipulation, everything led back to her. I remember sitting in my living room, staring at the screen of my laptop, feeling like I was watching a bad movie. But this was real. It was all real, and I was the one getting screwed over. I felt disgusted, furious, and helpless at the same time. How could someone do this? How could she betray me, our daughter, everything we built? I had to remind myself that I was fighting for what was right, for what was mine. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice, about holding her accountable. Once I had the full picture, I moved quickly. I filed a legal claim to freeze her assets, to prevent her from transferring any more money, and demanded an accounting of all her hidden funds. I also subpoenaed her phone and email records, hoping to find more clues or even proof of her affair. I knew that once the court got involved, her schemes would start unraveling faster. I also contacted a forensic accountant, someone who specialized in tracing money laundering and offshore accounts. The goal was to get a clear, detailed report of exactly how much she'd stolen, how she'd hidden it, and where it all was now. Throughout this process, Sarah kept acting like nothing was wrong. She'd throw tantrums, call me paranoid or jealous, and dismiss the whole thing as a misunderstanding. But I saw through her act. I knew she was panicking, and I could tell she was trying to buy time. She'd even started turning the kids against me, telling them I was overreacting and that I was just trying to ruin her. That made me angrier. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I was trying to protect what was ours. The worst part was the emotional toll. I felt betrayed not just by her actions but by my own blindness. I kept asking myself how I missed the signs, how I didn't see the red flags earlier. Was I so blind to her lies that I let her get away with this? The fact that she'd been sleeping with her lover all along, while I was at home thinking everything was fine, made me sick to my stomach. I kept replaying our last conversations, trying to find any clues I missed. Meanwhile, I knew I had to prepare for the inevitable legal battles ahead. I had to stay focused, keep my emotions in check, and fight for what was rightfully mine. I wasn't just after revenge. I was after justice. I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions, to understand that betrayal doesn't come without a cost. I also knew I had to protect my daughter from all of this mess. She was too young to understand everything now, but someday she'd realize what her mother did. I wanted to be there for her, too. Protect her from the damage Sarah was causing. Every day felt like one moment I'd be hopeful that I could turn this around, and the next I'd be overwhelmed with anger and despair. But I refused to give up. I was determined to fight for what was mine, my house, my money, my reputation. I had to show Sarah that her lies and schemes wouldn't get her away with this. I knew she'd try to manipulate the system, spin stories, and maybe even try to intimidate me into backing down. But I wasn't going to let her. I started documenting everything: the court documents, the evidence I had, the timeline of her lies. I even kept a journal of my thoughts, trying to stay sane amid the chaos. I knew that once I went to court, this would all come out into the open, and I was ready for that. I wanted her to see that I wasn't just some naive fool. I was a man who'd been betrayed, but also a man who was prepared to fight for his rights. Sometimes I wondered if I'd ever get closure, if I'd ever feel like I'd won, or if this was just the beginning of a long, ugly war. But deep down, I knew one thing: I wasn't going down without a fight, and I'd make damn sure she paid for every lie, every dollar she stole, and every ounce of pain she caused. The truth was going to come out. I just had to hold on until then. The legal process dragged on, and every day felt like a new battle. Sarah was doing her best to stall, to spin her lies, to pretend she was the victim. She'd show up at court with her high heels, her bitchy smirk, acting like she was the innocent wife betrayed by her angry husband. But I knew better. I had the evidence, mountains of it, and I was prepared to fight her every step of the way. The moment I filed the paperwork to freeze her assets and demand an accounting, she went into full damage control. She started calling friends, family, anyone who would listen, trying to paint me as the villain, that I was controlling, paranoid, jealous. She told everyone I was just overreacting, that I was jealous of her success, that I didn't trust her. But I didn't care what she said anymore. I had seen too much, uncovered too many lies. The truth was out there, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. Meanwhile, I kept digging. I hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar she'd moved, every account she'd opened, and every piece of money she'd hidden. The results were staggering. She moved hundreds of thousands offshore, used shell companies, and even bought luxury items with the stolen funds: designer handbags, jewelry, and even a couple of expensive trips with her lover. It was like watching a criminal mastermind at work. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized she'd been planning this for a long time. One of the most gut-wrenching moments came when I found out she'd been secretly selling off parts of the property. She'd already sold the family home for $750, $0, but I discovered she'd also transferred ownership of some other assets, like a vacation property and even some stocks, into names of her friends and relatives. She was trying to hide everything, to make sure I couldn't get my hands on anything. I felt a mix of rage and despair. How could she do this to us? To our daughter? The court hearings were brutal. Sarah brought her lawyer, a slick guy who kept trying to discredit me, claiming I was paranoid and that I had no proof of her wrongdoing. But I did. I had bank statements, emails, recorded conversations, and the forensic report. I presented it all. The judge looked at the mountain of evidence and ordered her to produce detailed financial statements and account access. The court also froze several of her bank accounts and ordered a full audit of her finances. In the meantime, Sarah's behavior became even more vicious. She started accusing me of being abusive, controlling, and jealous, trying to turn the court and our friends against me. She'd scream at me in front of everyone, call me a crazy, jealous husband who couldn't handle her success. But I didn't care. I knew her game. I knew she was desperate to cover her tracks, to make herself look like the victim instead of the thief and the cheat. One night, I found her in the bedroom packing a bag. She was crying, or at least she pretended to be. She told me she was leaving, that she couldn't stand the pressure, that she was going to start a new life with her lover. I saw the tears, but I also saw the determination in her eyes. She thought she could run away from everything, hide the money, and escape justice. But I wasn't going to let her. I told her she wasn't going anywhere until this was settled, that I had all the evidence, and that I was going to make her answer for everything she'd done. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I felt betrayed, angry, and exhausted. The woman I married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Every day I battled feelings of sadness and rage, trying to keep myself together for my daughter's sake. I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about trust, about standing up for myself and our family. I kept reminding myself why I was doing this. not just for the money, but to restore some sense of justice, to show her that actions have consequences. That lying, cheating, stealing, those things don't go unpunished. I was determined to see this through, no matter how long the fight took. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything she stole, not without paying a price. And so I waited, preparing for the next round of court hearings. I knew she'd keep fighting, trying to manipulate her way out of it, but I had the evidence. I had the truth. And I was ready to expose her lies, to make sure she paid for the betrayal. For me, this wasn't just about reclaiming what she took. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of justice, and protecting what little was left of my family. The battle wasn't over yet, but I was in it for the long haul. The court hearings kept dragging on, and every session felt like a new battlefield. Sarah was doing everything she could to delay, to muddy the waters, and to turn the court against me. She was good at spinning stories, telling the judge I was controlling, jealous, and unreasonable. She claimed I was making false accusations to ruin her reputation. But I had the evidence, and I made damn sure it all came out. I submitted everything I had: bank statements, emails, forensic reports, witness testimonies. I knew I had the upper hand, but that didn't make it any easier to stay calm. One day I received a court order to produce a full accounting of her financial dealings. I had to sit across from her lawyer, watching her try to look innocent while her eyes flicked nervously. She was sweating and fidgeting, trying to hide her panic. That moment I realized how much she'd been lying. She'd been so confident, so manipulative, but now she was cracking under the pressure. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but mostly I just wanted it all to be over so I could finally get some peace. What really pushed things forward was when the forensic accountant delivered the final report. The numbers were staggering. She'd hidden over $1 million in total. The sale of the house, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the luxury purchases, all of it added up. She'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. I sat there, stunned, realizing how deep her scheme went. It was like uncovering a crime syndicate, not just a cheating wife. With this evidence, I filed for full financial restitution, demanding her to return all the stolen money, plus damages. I also asked the court to order her to pay back the full amount of the loan she'd taken out in my name, 200 that she'd forged my signature on. The judge was furious when he saw the evidence of her deception. He ordered her to pay back every cent, and he froze her remaining assets until the case was settled. Meanwhile, she was still trying to fight me in court, claiming I was the one controlling her, that I was trying to ruin her reputation. She even hired a new lawyer, one who specialized in criminal defense, trying to spin everything as a scam on my part. But her lies didn't hold up under scrutiny. The evidence was too overwhelming. Her attempts to turn the tables only made her look more guilty. Behind the scenes, I was also working on getting full custody of our daughter. I didn't trust Sarah anymore, not after everything I'd uncovered. I knew she'd tried to manipulate her into thinking I was the bad guy, but I had enough evidence of her reckless behavior, her affair, her financial schemes, her lies. I wanted her to be held accountable, not just financially but also as a mother. The emotional toll was intense. I'd gone from feeling betrayed and furious to feeling exhausted and numb. I'd lost my partner, the woman I thought I knew, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. Finally, I was taking control of my life again. I didn't want to be a victim anymore. I wanted justice, and I was going to see it through, no matter how long it took. During one of the court sessions, Sarah snapped. She accused me of stalking her, of trying to control her, of being an overbearing husband. Her voice was shrill, her face red with anger. I just sat there, cold and composed, knowing that her words were just desperate attempts to distract from the truth. I didn't bother responding. I had the evidence, and that was all that mattered. At home, I started cleaning out her belongings, packing up the things she'd left behind. It was surreal, these pieces of our life, now just clutter in boxes. I looked around at the empty rooms of what was once our home, realizing how much I'd lost, but also how much I'd gained: clarity, justice, and a new resolve to rebuild. I knew I couldn't undo what was done, but I could at least take control of the future. I also reached out to my daughter more. Often, I wanted her to see that even though her mother was making terrible choices, I was still here, still fighting for her. I promised I'd do everything I could to protect her from the chaos and lies. That bond, that responsibility, kept me grounded through the worst of it. I knew this fight wasn't just about money or property. It was about integrity, about standing up for what's right. Looking back, I realize I learned a lot about myself. I learned that even in the face of betrayal, I can be resilient. That sometimes the truth needs to be fought for, no matter how ugly things get. That trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, but not impossible if you're willing to stand your ground. And most of all, I learned that you have to take control of your life, even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. I don't know how this will all end. I know she'll keep trying to fight, to manipulate, to hide what she can. But I also know I've done everything I could to expose her lies, to reclaim what's ours, and to protect my daughter from the fallout. The battle is over yet, but I'm not backing down. I'll keep fighting until I get what's fair, until she's held accountable for everything she's done. And when it's all said and done, I hope I can finally find peace again. The final court hearing felt like the climax of a long, exhausting battle. After months of digging through lies, chasing hidden accounts, and fighting off her attempts to manipulate the system, I finally saw the judge deliver the verdict. Courtroom was tense, everyone waiting to see if Sarah's house of cards would come crashing down. When the judge ordered her to pay back every dollar she'd stolen, to surrender the assets she'd hidden, and to cover the legal costs I'd accumulated, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It was like finally closing a chapter I never wanted to write. Sarah looked defeated, her face pale and strained. Her bitchy smirk had faded into a desperate, angry glare. She realized she'd lost completely. The judge's decision was clear. She was to return the full $750, $0 from the sale of the house, reimburse the $200, $0 loan she forged in my name, and pay damages for her fraudulent activities. Her offshore accounts were frozen, and the court appointed an auditor to track every penny she'd hidden. I watched her struggle to hold herself together, knowing she'd fought tooth and nail to avoid this outcome but failing miserably. For me, the victory was bittersweet. I'd fought so hard for justice, but the emotional scars of betrayal still lingered. I felt drained, like I'd been through a war I never signed up for, but at least now I could breathe again. I could start to rebuild what was left of my life, my reputation, and my relationship with my daughter. That was the real victory, knowing I had protected her from the chaos, and that I'd finally held her mother accountable. In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly to finalize the legal process. The court ordered Sarah to turn over her assets, and she was forced to pay restitution. I also filed for full custody of our daughter, convinced she was unfit to be the mother she'd shown herself to be. The judge agreed, citing her reckless behavior, her lies, and her financial schemes. My daughter and I moved into a new place, smaller but ours. It wasn't the life I imagined, but it was a start. Looking back, I realize how much I've learned from all this. Trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deep. But I also learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, is worth it. That sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it means losing everything temporarily. And that no matter how much someone lies or manipulates, the truth will eventually come out if you're persistent enough. I also learned that revenge isn't about getting even. It's about justice. About making sure the people who do wrong face the consequences of their actions. I didn't do this just to punish Sarah. I did it to protect myself, to reclaim my dignity, and to ensure my daughter grows up in a world where honesty and integrity still matter. Now I focus on healing. I see a therapist, work on rebuilding my confidence, and spend more quality time with my daughter. I've become more cautious, more aware of the red flags, but I also refuse to live in fear. I know that betrayal can happen to anyone, but resilience is what keeps us going. I've learned to trust myself again, to believe that justice can prevail, and that even after the worst storms, there's a chance for a new beginning. This experience has changed me forever. I'll never forget the pain, but I'll also never forget how I fought through it. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's a flicker of hope, that truth and justice can still win, even when the odds are stacked against you. And I hope my story serves as a lesson to anyone out there who feels lost in betrayal. Stand tall, fight for what's right, and never let anyone steal your peace. Because in the end, integrity and perseverance are what truly define us.